think about initiatives or expansion again of their patient lead volume, like how do they get patients into the door with other areas, right? So whether it's adding adjunct services within your practice, like nutritional counseling or other opportunities to bring other providers to work in with a PT. They've added technology to, work on the marketing side, just all of these things that you don't have time for when you're actually working with your, just seeing patients all day long. So that was a super positive piece as well, is, just the opportunity for clinics to expand and finally tackle some of those initiatives to help them grow as a business and make them more viable and scalable for this next sort of phase of where we're going.
Welcome, Heidi. This has been a long time coming, and especially when I saw the most recent State of the Rehab report, I was like, I really need to get her on the show to just dig into some of these things. So thank you so much for making the time. I know you're very busy.
Oh gosh, it's my pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you for wanting to dig in. This data is something that is near and dear to my heart. We've been doing this now for 5 years, believe it or not. So some really good baseline numbers to compare to now. And we had over 7,000, close to 7,000 respondents. So it's juicy. And I know you've had a chance to take a look at it. It's over 60 pages long. So it's a lot of good information. So thanks for allowing me this opportunity to jump in.
Absolutely. This is great. So before we get into that though, I'd love to hear more about your backstory and your entry into physical therapy. And also, of course, like the thing that compelled you to start and create what is now the biggest, EMR platform by far among physical therapy as a profession, and all that you've utilized that also to do beyond just creating an EMR. But yeah, so give us the history of bringing you up to this point.
Sure. Well, I've been an athlete since I was in high school. I played multiple sports, was lucky enough to go on to play basketball at the collegiate level. I played at UC Davis in Northern California. And entering UC Davis, one of the reasons why I wanted to go there, I was pre-med. They have one of the premier medical schools in the country, and that was sort of my initial sort of trajectory. Knew I wanted to be in healthcare. And my junior year, I went down with a knee injury, and I had an MRI, and it was inconclusive to where they thought I torn my ACL. I had some laxity, but they weren't really sure. And it was for sure not all the way torn. So of course they didn't want to do surgery, and they sent me to PT. That was sort of my first interaction with a physical therapist. I had obviously been in the training room a lot, but never, really for any kind of major injury. And so I did all the exercises diligently with my therapist. And within 6 weeks, I was back to running, with a brace. And then by the postseason, I was actually able to play with my team, and went on to train really hard with that therapist over the summer. And my senior year, I actually came back and played with no brace and have not had to have any kind of surgery since then. And so, obviously super intrigued and very dedicated to figuring out, like, how can I do this with other athletes? Like, how can I get involved? And so, went on to do a couple of internships and sort of changed my major, if you will, and went on to PT school from there, and went to the University of St. Augustine, where I got my PT degree. And as I got into PTs, I joined up with some sports medicine practices, worked my way up to be a clinic director, was actually working with one of the largest sports medicine practices in the country. This is back in the mid 2000s. Had sort of checked all the boxes, if you will, on, working with professional athletes, high school athletes, college athletes, like all the work. Was on the LPGA tour, working with the athletes there. Just an incredible sort of, career as a PT. But I also started getting into the business side as the clinic director. And one of our biggest expenses at the time was transcription and dictation. And if you take yourself back to 2000, early mid 2000s, 2005, 2006, we were all documenting with pen and paper. I know it's hard to believe when students think about it today, they're just like, what? Like, it's just mind blowing for people.
That's
right?
When I graduated. I still remember, doing the dictation documentation on the phone. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And so, I had P&L responsibilities, and with that being our biggest expense, I wanted to try to find something that could help offset that cost. And there were some EMRs that had started to come out into the PT world, but most of them were, all of them at least, were medically based, and they were server based, meaning that I had to get my own servers. And we had a very large practice. We had over 10 therapists, 40 people on staff. So it wasn't something that, that cost of doing all of that was going to be a huge burden to the business. And so paired up with a software engineer to do something that was really just supposed to be for my practice. He had a background in enterprise level web-based platforms. And when he took a look at healthcare and what was out there, he just was like, oh my gosh, there's so much opportunity here. So we created something originally that was supposed to be for my practice. And we got a lot of great feedback from my therapist. And of course, that was version 1. That took us about 9 months to do. And then I had a lot of colleagues that started coming back to me and saying, hey, we want to try what you're doing. We've heard positive things about it. So within the next 6 months, we had another 10 practices up and running, iterating on the product, giving us positive feedback. And then we did a little bit of market research, and we found that, that problem that I was having was sort of ubiquitous with the whole industry. And so 80% of therapists were going through similar issues that I was. And so, and documenting on pen and paper. So we decided to launch the company, WebPT, in February of 2008. We sold 5 clinics that first month. And you fast forward to where we are today, and we hold just shy of 40% market share, meaning 40% of therapists that are using an EMR are using a WebPT product. Wow. And that 80% number has kind of flipped on its head now. So 80% of therapists are using some sort of digital platform now to do their documentation. And as you know, like over this past 10 years, like I'm not sure how anyone is actually still doing the whole pen and paper thing. I know there's still people out there doing it. But with all the regulatory change and, insurance complications and requirements that they have, like, it's really hard to still keep up with everything and be compliant and not have some sort of digitized documentation platform.
Yeah. Wow. What a journey that must have been.
Yeah, I always joke that I seriously got an MBA on the job.
Sure.
It's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, 5 MBAs.
Super fun.
Man. Yeah. Well, I hear about businesses and all this kind of stuff, and I just get all excited and want to geek out on that. And I definitely want to get into the report, but I am curious, like, as someone who has scaled now a very large business with a very large team, what are some of the things that you would suggest to anyone out there in any kind of healthcare business, or I guess business at all, that wants to do something big or scale something up large? What would you tell them to look out for, to look for, to do or avoid?
Yeah, well, the first thing in starting a business is it's all about problem solving, right? The way I shared the story, and it was really what we came up with as WebPT, was solving the problem that I was having. Like, it was something that truly was going to meet the needs for solving the problem that I was having. And that's, most entrepreneurial stories start that way, that you stumble onto an issue. And it's not always just about building a better mousetrap. It's really making sure the problem is something that, which a lot of times it's going to be a problem that a lot of people keep looking at, and they just keep walk on by because they don't know how to solve it. And so if you find that sort of thing that people, just don't want to have anything to do with. They just keep doing with the status quo because they just don't understand how to solve it. For example, when we started WebPT, part of the issue was obviously the documentation, but it was also this billing component, right? Billing had already become digitized. Like insurances had mandate that you have to transact your claims information digitally. They didn't want any more paper claims being sent. And so while most of the EMRs in the industry at that point in time had focused a lot on billing, and it's very complicated. But then they had tacked on some Word document or something that was not so easy to use on the documentation side. And so my problem was about the transcription. That was really what I was trying to solve. And so we went and attacked the documentation side, and obviously did something that no one else was able to do. And we also solved it in a way with being web-based that was truly more intuitive and specific to the workflow of a therapist, right? Which we have the burden of a lot more documentation because we see the patient more often than, say, a physician does. And so workflow and the intuitiveness of your customer, critically important as you're starting to build and to understand and to listen to what the needs of the customer are as you continue to grow and build a larger customer base. That listening and understanding of how to solve those problems and continue to innovate in solving those is also how to scale a business. But it all comes down to problem solving at the end of the day.
On an ongoing basis. That's
Yep.
great. And then obviously you couldn't have done this without a really solid team. And so I'd love to hear any of your take home points or must do's or must knows when it comes to building a team, whether small or large, or if as it gets larger, something changes. Love to hear about that too.
Yeah. So in the beginning, it's all about having sort of scrappy, entrepreneurial minded people who at the end of the day are willing to wear multiple hats. It's not so much about specialization per se. And it's also, it's so much about, that core group and believing and having, you as the founder have to have a true vision or purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. When I talk a lot about our success, what we were intuitively, naturally able to put together, what were the three, what I now know as we progressed through this and looked back retrospectively, and is there's three main personality types that you need in a successful, scalable business. And that's, one is a visionary, someone who truly understands like where you're going. They see the forest beyond the trees. They're not always the greatest at executing, right, and getting things done. They're always the idea person. They're on to the next thing before whatever that first idea is gets even implemented. So you have to have someone who's going to be the operator, the executor, who takes those ideas and brings them to life into whatever form or whatever you're doing, right? And then the third one, which doesn't always necessarily have to be right at the beginning, we brought this person, this personality type, which is a processor, in about year 2 of launching the company. And what the processor is a person who comes in who builds repeatable processes within your workflow that makes your business scalable. So whether it's technology, whether it's, supporting systems, more specific to your business plan and roadmap building so that you can actually have, again, going back to what we'll talk about, outcomes, right, and goals that you can kind of work towards. We had those loosely in the beginning, but everything's so chaotic and you're kind of working in the beginning to just make sure that everything is sort of moving forward and you're not able to look ahead that far. So once we brought that sort of processor mindset into the business as well, that was kind of a turning point for the scalability opportunity and growth with the company.
Very cool. Very cool. Love it. All right. Well, I could go on and ask questions, but I'm
Yeah, I've just shared the other piece that I think, if I could just finish this topic on entrepreneurship is, a lot of people think that, well, in order to grow a business, I have to, get outside funding into the company. And we bootstrapped the company for the first 4 years, from the time that were building the product to the first 2 years of selling the product. And we had over 100 clinics using our platform. You could see the trajectory of growth. We had proven our model before we took outside funding in. And what I see, because I work a lot in the startup world here in Arizona, is that, it's important for investors to come in and see that trajectory. And for us, it was really important from an equity standpoint of ownership in the company, that we only wanted to give up a small piece in order to continue to grow, right? And so I just like to put that in, because I think it's really important that, I know not everybody can do it, and depending on your business and, if you're in sort of the biosciences, it's sometimes a little bit harder because it takes a lot of money up front to scale and build a product. But as long as you can, it's really important from a ownership and leadership perspective, but also just in your own sort of vision of what you're trying to accomplish, to keep that in your control as long as possible.
Very good. I like it. All right, let's get to the report. Thank you for entertaining my entrepreneurship questions and that kind of stuff.
But I love talking about it.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can do a round two on just kind of on that. But so before we get into, kind of the genre of this podcast, which is kind of cash pay PT or cash pay healthcare services, can you just give us like the broad strokes, of the other components of the report and what the findings were? And, now that you have had that few years of data to compare, like, what were the big changes? What were maybe surprises or not surprises?
Yeah, well, this is a unique year, obviously, because of COVID. And so, one of the things that we zeroed in on was really the recovery and how quickly that was going to take place, how clinics were doing, how they sort of fared through this past 2020 year. And what we found was that it was very promising. We knew that there was this dip, that happened right in that March, April timeframe, in which, the country as a whole kind of shut down. And obviously we were essential healthcare providers, but there were still over 50% of businesses that had moved to using telehealth to see patients. They weren't actually seeing patients in person. Mm-hmm. And there were quite a few clinics that had stopped seeing patients altogether for a short period of time. And so, as you know, like, if you don't have reserve funds to get you through that can be pretty detrimental. But what we asked, and we found that we're at least, 25% of clinics had enough cash reserves to get them through those few months. So they were surviving. And as you know, most clinics are now in full recovery. But it did, make a lot of folks think about, well, is it time for me to get out of private practice? And so I think it was 14% of our leaders that answered the survey said they were very interested in selling their business. And this was 14% more than last year.
Okay.
Who were interested in selling. And so, there's quite a bit of consolidation that is happening in our industry as a whole. So that was one big thing. We did see quite a few rehab professionals that, did have to either be furloughed or had their pay reduced. I think it was 40% of therapists were scheduled to work fewer hours. 15% of them were asked if they could take a reduced pay for a short period of time. And a whopping 45% of the therapists that answered our poll, our survey, voluntarily made changes to their employment. So they voluntarily either said, hey, I'm going to take a step back, or I know there's actually quite a few, the high percentage of people that are now moving into non-clinical. I spoke to quite a few clinic owners over the last few months, and the hiring issue is real. So if they had to let some people go, it's really hard now to ramp clinics all the way back up to full capacity, because the therapist shortage now is coming to bear.
So tell us more about the details of how that, you're saying that because so many therapists had been laid off and then took other jobs or just left the field, or why is there all of a sudden more of a shortage now than, a year ago?
Yeah. So just like every other industry, we're experiencing it as an organization in the tech world too. People with the opportunity now to work from home, we're seeing what everyone's called the Great Resignation. And it's happening across all industries, in which people over this last year have sat back and reevaluated and said, what do I really want to be doing with my life? And a lot of people liked working from home. And so they've now, looked for other things out in other areas. And don't get me wrong, there's quite a few therapists that are obviously love clinical practice and they're coming back to clinical practice. But, there's still risks of COVID, and we're not through this. We see the variant numbers in the infection rates going back up now, albeit less, but there, people still have a lot of fear of sometimes going, or they may have, families at home, family members at home that are, they don't want to have to go through the whole process of staying in the garage, taking all their clothes off. I heard plenty of stories of people doing that.
Yeah.
So yes, there is, I don't, in our survey, about 15% of people said that they were looking elsewhere outside of clinical practice.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, what the percentage is overall, but from our survey, that was the indicator of, hey, we may be looking to try some non-clinical activities or job roles that don't necessarily mean that I'm going back to direct patient care.
And was that 15% increase? Is that a question that was always asked in the past?
No, this is the first time we have ever asked that question.
Okay, cool. That's a good addition. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So that, and we're just seeing like your client clinics are across the board, kind of not across the board maybe, but you're hearing, man, it's really hard to find enough therapists to ramp back up.
Yeah. Well, and people are just moving, right? So they're moving around to different areas. There's a lot of, in the research, just in general in the US, there's migration out of big cities and moving, more into the suburbs. And so it just depends where, clinics are located, but in the, more dense sort of larger cities, it's been a little more difficult sometimes for clinics to find a therapist. And, they're just now frankly requesting a few more perks, right? They maybe want more flexible hours and benefits and pay and all of the things. I know you've talked about student debt, right, in the past and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of mitigating factors that are in favor of the employee now versus the employer, that employers sort of have to step up. And that's not always easy because of what we know about reimbursements, and which is probably a good segue into the cash-based services conversation, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's before we dive into that though, there was one other thing I wanted to ask, because I have, and I'm guessing others have wondered the same thing, as like, maybe we still have yet to see the full impact of what the pandemic, the worst of it had done to our industry and to especially to private practice. But what has been, what are the respondents and numbers and your clients kind of told you? I mean, did a large percentage of practices actually go out of business, or were the majority of them able to hang on? Are they smaller now? Kind of what are the numbers telling us as far as that goes?
So we know that based on our survey, 48.7% of practices ended 2020 below budget. And so they took a hit as far as, what their revenue was projected to be. We know that 64% of clinics had to lay off staff, sometimes permanently eliminating positions in their clinics, or even furloughed staff during 2020. And so when you look at those numbers, we also know, based on the respondents, that 85%, this was in January to February, and I know it's creeping back up to 95 now, but 85% of clinics were pretty much fully recovered, meaning that they had now gotten back to pre-COVID numbers in terms of visits and patient loads back into their practice. And this is January, February of this past year. And anecdotally, it's probably closer to 95. Even I know clinics are actually more busy than they were pre-COVID, just because the backlog of patients who, put off their surgeries and other things that are now happening. Yeah. And so that trajectory is very, very positive. There were quite a bit of clinics that actually did go out of business. I don't know the exact percentage of those numbers, but we do know that the larger practices who had more of a financial cushion could, withstand the pressures of that significant decline in revenue without the patient volumes through the 2020 timeframe. And so essentially it affected small and medium-sized businesses a lot harder than it did, some of the larger enterprise businesses that are out there in our industry.
And do you have any thoughts or predictions in regards to how the overall impact on the economy, which I believe probably is not really even close to fully felt, like all of these non-essential, or what were considered non-essential businesses that did go out of business. It seems like PT and in the medical world, because we were essential, we fared a lot better than a lot of industries. Yep. And the effect on the overall long-term economy from all the closures and the slowdown of in other industries, like, do you foresee any positive or negative impacts on the horizon for us to look out for, in regards to any more global economic changes?
Well, COVID's not going away, right? Based on our vaccination numbers and things like that, the variants are going to continue to circulate and for the foreseeable future, right? Until we get a significantly larger percentage of people vaccinated. What I also know is that it's hard to say this as a positive thing, but because of these illnesses, it has, and also just looking at the sort of broader healthcare landscape, I know that there's quite a few more therapists now that are understanding and expanding their patient sort of diagnoses, if you will, of types of patients that they're bringing into the practice. For example, the long haul COVID patients, right? We are prime providers to help with a lot of the ailments and issues that they're dealing with. So it's broadening our reach in the population health segment, right? Drawing more attention to, diabetes patients and obesity issues. You name it. We've been trying to sort of figure out a way for us to step up and demonstrate the value that PTs can have in these areas. And I feel like, it's not where it should be, but I know there's been a strong sort of push into having more opportunities in this space. So that's one sort of positive thing. We've been talking a lot with a lot of our clinic members or WebPT members about, hey, listen, you were kind of shut down through this 2020. Our mantra was all about, while you can't work in your business per se on your normal patient care, take the time now to work on your business, right? And so what we saw also based on our survey was people taking this opportunity to think about initiatives or expansion again of their patient lead volume, like how do they get patients into the door with other areas, right? So whether it's adding adjunct services within your practice, like nutritional counseling or other opportunities to bring other providers to work in with a PT. They've added technology to, work on the marketing side, just all of these things that you don't have time for when you're actually working with your, just seeing patients all day long. So that was a super positive piece as well, is, just the opportunity for clinics to expand and finally tackle some of those initiatives to help them grow as a business and make them more viable and scalable for this next sort of phase of where we're going with PT.
So that sounds also like a good segue into the cash services, because maybe that's part of what, a lot of folks were, it seems to me, they were working on. I've certainly had, an influx of new students, coaching students, and especially practices that are not just starting out as cash pay, but more and more who are looking to transition or at least drop their lower paying contracts. So tell us what the report and the respondents told you guys about the addition of cash pay services and anything around that topic.
Yeah, so the burden of reimbursement and the decline of reimbursement has been something that, has plagued our industry for a long, long time. It's nothing new, right? But this time period in which, cash reserves were starting to go down and just patient volumes weren't there, allowed them to think about, hey, again, a cash-based could be an initiative that I think a lot of clinics wanted to do, is sort of rebalancing their revenue streams. And so of the respondents in our survey, over 50% of them said that they intended to add or increase cash-based services in 2021 to their practice, right? Part of that was to sort of mitigate the impending 9%, which we all advocated really strongly against, but also knowing what's coming with the further cuts that we need to continue to advocate against this year. But frankly, people are just tired, right? They're tired of fighting. And so if your revenues continue to decline, you need to add some diversity in your revenue streams. And so that was a big thing that we found out of the survey, higher than that number has ever been with regard to people interested in how do I actually now add more cash-based services and move away from strictly having insurance contracts be the way that I am able to see patients.
Yeah. And did you guys, whether in the report or just from you hearing from your clients, like what are some of the examples, aside from just cash-based physical therapy, right? Like, did they give other examples of these of services that they might be adding or want to add?
Yeah, there were actually some non-traditional services that I thought were really interesting that came up in the survey. Of course, and we haven't talked about telehealth, but telehealth as an option obviously spiked tremendously. I mentioned 50% of our respondents said that they were actually seeing all of their patients via telehealth at the height of the pandemic, and obviously had continued to offer it as a service. It's great to see more insurance companies now actually willing to pay for telehealth, but we still have a long way to go in terms of changing policies in order for us to continue to see patients after, this, the pandemic is no longer deemed an emergency sort of situation. So telehealth was one of them. Nutritional counseling, I mentioned earlier. Durable medical equipment was another area that people were interested in getting more understanding about, because it's not always easy. But adding, different things in their practice that they actually can sell to patients. Orthopedic medicine, which was another one, which I thought was really interesting. So, either contracting with or working with and bringing an orthopedic, whether it's PA or surgeon, under their umbrella, doing more partnerships there. And then one of my favorite things was rideshare.
Yeah.
So adding and partnering in rideshare services. Uber has sort of these partnerships that they're doing now with larger companies and clinics that you can actually participate, and you get sort of, if you're recommending, your patients, that you actually get, I think it's a discounted rate, but then you also get a little bit of rev share in sort of each sort of transaction and rides that happen. So I thought that was really interesting, and just a huge value add, right? I mean, some of the compliance and why people cancel a no-show is just that they don't have transportation. And so it's broadening the diversity of the patient base, right, that you can actually see. And also just hugely helpful for the community.
So they're like, they're kind of functioning as affiliates in a way. It's like, hey, here's your Uber account code, and then they're getting a little piece of that.
Yep.
Wow, that's very interesting. It's not one I had heard of. For sure.
Well, I love the out of the box thinking, right? And so anytime you can, and this was definitely something that it's a small percentage of people, but I think more and more folks are, again, thinking outside of the box of how do if I can't get to my patients and my patients can't get to me, how do we connect? Like, how do we get together? And telehealth obviously is not the answer for everything. It obviously got us through a period of time when it was impossible to get together, and telehealth obviously expands the opportunity for us to see patients in areas that we couldn't reach before, whether it's, far reaching rural areas. But personally, I think that it's a hybrid model that's going to be where it's at in the future, where telehealth is used as a check-in and maybe home exercise program progression and things like that. But at the end of the day, we still need to get our hands on people for parts of it, maybe not as much as we think today. And I think that's what some of the outcome studies are going to show. The people that did this in this hybrid sort of situation throughout the pandemic is that patients still got a lot better, and they were much happier. Their patient satisfaction scores were super high, and the fact that they didn't have to drive to your clinic every visit, right? And they were still able to get your expertise in progressing them along to full function.
Yeah, I loved it. I was very skeptical, but then when kind of forced into it, in a way, it was like it kind of tickled my creative brain, because you had to think differently about how can I get this person better without my hands, and it just made the day a little just a little more exciting in a way. It was not so kind of repetitive. And so
I just hope PT schools jump on this and start talking about how to do telehealth better, right? We all got thrown into this and had to make it up as we went along. And, you know, brilliant folks like you, like, took the time to say, like, okay, what's not working, what's working, like, how do I fine tune this? But, you know, just jumping in and thinking that you can do it the same as you, when you see a patient in the clinic is not right.
Yeah.
So yeah, understanding how to work telehealth to its maximum potential. I think we still got some work to do on true sort of workflows there, but I'm excited for the future of adjuncting that to our normal sort of plan of care.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. So you mentioned outcomes just now, and I'd love to chat a little bit more about that. And I was just going to read from one of your recent blog posts that was kind of, you know, looking at cash pay therapy. And one of the things you said, above all, the most important action PTs can take to advance our profession is tracking outcomes data. Collecting and sharing outcomes is the key to demonstrating rehab's real value, or rehab therapy's real value to all healthcare stakeholders, payers, patients, referral sources included. And those in the cash pay realm play a critical role in this. Since cash pay PTs may have the opportunity to provide more patient-centric one-on-one care than their insurance-based counterparts, then they have a greater opportunity to collect objective data, proving the benefits of their treatment approach, as opposed to a more high volume approach where patients may see multiple therapists and extenders. Perhaps they even achieve better outcomes in fewer visits, but how will anyone know this without the data to prove it? And I when I read that, I was like, that's a really great point. And, you know, very little, if any, actual data out there, you know, on does this model really, you know, produce better outcomes? Anecdotally, you know, you ask any cash pay PT that was once, you know, seeing 5 patients an hour and now spends a whole hour one-on-one, is usually a raving fan. But at the end of the day, you know, we don't really have that data. So what I was excited to get into was like, how can a cash pay or how do you guys track your outcome data and gather that? And like, how does WebPT help with that? Can a cash practice utilize it? What if is there anything out there, whether WebPT or otherwise, that allows you to do that if you're not an EMR user or a WebPT EMR user? Sorry, so many questions at once. But
No, that's okay.
This topic.
I'd like to just take a step back first and just recognize that I think there's a misnomer with many people that want to go into cash pay, that there's no longer a requirement for documentation. Like there's no longer a requirement to, you know, do outcomes. Like I get to treat patients and they pay me cash, right? Like I don't have any of this regulatory burden anymore. And while that's partially true in terms of you don't have to jump through the hoops that insurance companies might be adding on to the sort of baseline requirements that we sign up for as PTs, right? And from a licensure perspective, there is still requirements to be documenting exactly, you know, what you're doing with the patient. Outcomes should be mandatory in my belief with every patient, from obviously your initial evaluation with that patient to get your baseline, and then incrementally throughout their plan of care. And like you said, like cash pay, the reason people are so attracted to cash pay is because they think because this one-on-one atmosphere, they get to spend more time with the patient, because they can charge potentially more per visit, is going to give me better outcomes. And there's a big difference between patient satisfaction and outcomes, right? They go hand in hand a lot of times, because, you know, if the patient's happy and likes their therapist, we know that they're going to be more eager to continue with their home exercise program and be engaged in their therapy sessions. So I just kind of wanted to take that step back first to kind of set because I think first of all, we have to get everyone, whether you're cash pay or insurance, everyone to see the value in tracking those outcomes and the data that unfortunately insurance companies have based on claims, not necessarily, true outcomes data, that are dictating, the episode of care, whether it's length in terms of number of visits or what their expectations are for you as a therapist. Mm-hmm. And the level at which you are supposed to get to the patient too, before they won't keep paying, they won't pay for services anymore. What's medically necessary. Right. So first we got to get to that place. But you obviously have a lot of cash pay therapists following you. And so what I would say to them is you truly believe in what you're doing and how you're doing it. It's now getting more transparency with true data to show, are your assumptions correct, mm-hmm. right? Are you able to see the patient maybe in the last the episode of care is shortened because you're able to see patients for a little bit longer period of time during a session 101, and that makes a bigger impact on their overall recovery time. I don't know is to be true. I think you're right. There's so much more research to be done to separate out specifically cash pay versus insurance. We have a full outcomes tracking platform within WebPT that is integrated and woven into your evaluative process. You get to choose which outcome you want. The patient can fill it out. It's mostly patient-reported outcome based on the diagnosis. And so, the patient can get that digitally at home. They can fill it out with you online while you're in the clinic. And then, I think this should be a critical part of the conversation that's had with a patient from the beginning of here's where you are, here's your baseline, here's our goal as a partnership in your therapy moving forward. And then as they continue to progress, they take that same patient reported outcome and you both look at the progress. And if you're not progressing, well, maybe we need to change some things, right? So it's that partnership and engagement relationship with your patient in watching and looking at data that I think is critically important. And the differentiation then from cash based or cash pay to insurance based.
And is the platform that you guys have kind of woven in, is it like, is it something that can be used if they aren't a WebPT user? Is it only like it's woven in such that you wouldn't, it's not like a separate thing necessarily?
It's so integrated that we don't allow patients or people or therapists to just use the outcomes platform. It is, but I mean, we have a whole cash-based sort of package that narrows it down to really the basic things that you would need from a documentation perspective and keeping track of all of your records, and then adding, the outcomes into that so that you don't have to have all the bells and whistles, but it's again, where are you going to keep those records if you're doing it in two separate systems? Like it becomes more complicated if they're not sort of just, together and woven in.
Okay. Yeah.
Plus your reports and everything come together and it's easy to see all within our platform.
So then what would be, and I know we're running out of time, but what would be that kind of next step of if someone listening decided I'm going to start tracking this and they were tracking outcomes data, like how is that data then used? Like, do you guys have is there like a central database that where you can kind of see how you compare, and that can be also utilized in fighting for better reimbursements and helping the profession?
Within our outcomes platform, you can do all of those things. So you actually can compare yourself to All of the other WebPT users, it's obviously anonymized, so you can't see who it is, but you can actually look at it nationally. You can bring it down to regionally. You can bring it down to within your state. And we've had plenty of clinics. We have some testimonials on our actual website of folks that have used their data to go to insurance companies and actually, get higher reimbursement rates because they've been able to show. What's also unique about our platform is that it incorporates NPS, which is the Net Promoter Score. So you get patient satisfaction information alongside of the patient reported outcome. And so those are the two big pieces that, insurances are looking at. They want patients to be happy. They want them to be compliant. But they also want the objectiveness of are you a good therapist in progressing them and getting them back to their functional level that they want to be at. So by pairing those two in a nice, beautiful report, you're able to get that out and use it as you will. Now, we also have a lot of research studies that we help to supply with some of our data, again, anonymized, but we help to support. So if there's any universities that are out there that might be interested in doing some, we've worked with NAU, Northern Arizona University, we've worked with ATI and APTQI and a lot of other organizations that have been doing some outcome-based study and research to help provide some of that data for them to, because we have such a huge data set representing so many and the different sizes of practice that it becomes a unique set of data.
Great. That is very cool. I know we're about out of time, so I wanted to make sure to ask kind of, what are you most excited about right now? What are you working on? What's new for you, for WebPT, and kind of moving forward?
So one of the other sort of things that came out of our survey that we have asked year over year is sort of the demographic makeup from a race perspective. And what we've seen year after year and have not seen very much progress in is sort of the racial diversity within our industry. From our survey, 77.4% of rehab professionals identify as white. The next highest, diverse population is Asian, which was at 6.6%, Hispanic 5.2, 2.8% Black or African American. And so, as you can imagine, that is not anywhere near sort of what the greater US population looks like. Yeah. And so, trying to, one of our big goals as an organization is to attack the 90%, which, you may have heard us talking about. And that is the fact that 90% of patients or people in the US who have a diagnosis that could be helped by a therapist, musculoskeletal diagnosis, are not getting seen by PTs. They're getting seen by many other types of providers that may or may not be the best provider to help them. And so part of that story, we believe, is the fact that, there's just not a lot of connection known. Our brand and who we are and what we do as therapists is not known in many different in all populations. And so seeing this year over year over year and just not seeing any progress in it, and also just, everything that transpired at the mid to end of 2020 with the civil unrest that was occurring, prompted me to start my own foundation. I had started it actually in 2020. It's called Rising Tide. It was unclear of what I really wanted to do with it. And it all sort of came to a head at the end of 2020. And I'm proud to say that we launched it this week, actually. Great. So you can go to rising-tide.com. It's rising with a Z. And the foundation is basically a scholarship fund. And we're kicking off the 2021 year with offering 3 scholarships for incoming students that are going to PT school who have a racially underrepresented racial background. So BIPOC students going into PT school, or a PTA who's actually going through a bridge program to become a PT. And then we also have 2 scholarships for graduating PTs or existing PTs who are going into a residency program.
Great.
So it's something I'm super proud of, to be able to give back to a profession that's given so much to me, and hopefully, really starting to affect some change in getting more folks, getting more diversity into our industry.
Wonderful. That is fantastic. Thank you for doing that. That's great. And you should be proud. That's fantastic. Great. Well, I know that we've gone a little over and I apologize for that, but this has been wonderful and certainly something we should do more often. I'm excited to get someone with your, connections to so many in our field, not just through this kind of data, but, the interactions you have, just a wealth of information and knowledge to share. And so thank you for what you have done for our profession as well.
Well, Jared, back at you again. Thank you for this opportunity to share some of the information. But thanks for everything that you're doing as far as getting more opportunity for, different sort of segments of our industry to, especially this up and coming cash-based area, and providing so much education. I know there's probably quite a few, that 50% that we talked about, that's going to look to you for guidance as they try to implement more cash-based services. So thanks for all you do as well to advance our profession.
Of course. All right. Well, I look forward to round 2. Thank you again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cash-Based Practice Podcast. If you liked what you heard here today, we have some extremely important things we want to send you. First, a quick start guide to cash-based physical therapy and Medicare. This free ebook will provide the primary rules and regulations surrounding this confusing but important topic. Secondly, we want to share with you the 5 characteristics common to all successful cash-based practices. Find out the vital things Jared has learned from years of interviewing cash practice owners and running his own successful cash practice. As one of our listeners, we want to give you all this information absolutely free. You can get it right now by going to drjaredcarter.com/success. Again, that's drjaredcarter.com/success. Go there now to get your copies, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Cash-Based Practice Podcast. If you liked what you heard here today, we have some extremely important things we want to send you. First, a quick start guide to cash-based physical therapy and Medicare. This free ebook will provide the primary rules and regulations surrounding this confusing but important topic. Secondly, we want to share with you the 5 characteristics common to all successful cash-based practices. Find out the vital things Jared has learned from years of interviewing cash practice owners and running his own successful cash practice. As one of our listeners, we want to give you all this information absolutely free. You can get it right now by going to drjaredcarter.com/success. Again, that's drjaredcarter.com/success. Go there now to get your copies, and we'll see you next time.